Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party. I'm your host, David Rych. It's been a little while since I've actually had a guest on live. I've been playing a lot of reruns, just for a slew of different reasons. But we have back now, literally our highest ranked for viewership guest on the Illinois Green Party, Sid Smith, Professor Sid Smith, I should say, to give him his due diligence. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it very much. It'll be fun.
Absolutely.
I do want to apologize ahead of time. I live in the
absolutely.
country, and my internet can be a little wonky. So if you lose me, I'll be back in a minute or so.
Okay, no, not a problem. Not a problem at all. So yeah, I just wanted to have you back on again. Like, we have a new IT guy in the Illinois Green Party, and he's been doing all sorts of cool things with my show. Like
good.
isolating 20, 30-second shorts for stuff, like in different interviews and so on, and they're getting like thousands of hits. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a testament to the average American's attention span. The hour-long programs get 100, a couple hundred or whatever, and the 20-second shorts get thousands within a day.
Right.
Which is fine. That's cool. I'll take it. But yeah, he did a ranking of the highest viewership of guests in the top 4, and you ranked number 1.
Well, I'll put that down to the subject matter rather than me.
Well, I'm going to put it down to both. But anyway, you are you're a mathematician. You're not anymore, right? A professor at Virginia Tech. Or are you still
I am retired from teaching, but I was a college math teacher for a long time. Most recently here in Virginia, where I live now. But the last several years I have devoted to being an old fogey and farting around.
Which is okay too. I'm looking forward to that very much so. No, and I appreciate that. Mathematics is very dear to my heart. I'm not nearly as good at it as you are. More of a philosopher, logic guy than I am a mathematician. But I've always had solid mathematics in very hard regard, just critical thinking and reasoning skills in general, I guess. With mathematics being at the center of it. So you have these wonderful theories, ideas, and predictions about things going on in the world, especially concerning climate change and resource usage, I should say, is probably more accurate, more definitive of what you do. So why don't you tell us a bit about that? Because I know you're working on a new video now that hasn't come out yet, but you have several videos that you put out that we've talked about.
Video series called "How to Enjoy the End of the World," which I've talked about on previous interviews with you. So we started off talking about energy and complexity, because if you don't understand those two things, you really can't understand civilizational collapse. And then how energy and complexity relate to civilization and the growth of our civilization. And then the most recent one that I published, which is a year ago now, why civilizations die. And after I made that one, I set about to do one on ecological overshoot. And I talked a lot about ecological overshoot in the talks that I gave at Virginia Tech, which is kind of what got me started into doing videos, because I just did that for the Green Party, thinking this is a one-off and I won't, hear anything about it again. But the videos went a little bit viral. And so in those talks, that was 2017 and 2019, I talked a lot about our ecological overshoot. But the more I began to think about it as I wanted to make this new video, the more I realized that it's not going to do anybody any good to just have the same old, same old. I'd already talked about the impact of our civilization on the ecosystems, and I think people already pretty much know about that if they want to. But I think there's other things to be said about it that are much more interesting and taking much more deeply into the nature of our predicament. And so I've really taken myself back to school about it. That's one of the reasons it's taken so long to put this new video together, because I really wanted to get a little deeper into the subject and really give some good analysis and not just kind of recap the horror story of how we're destroying the ecosystem. So that's kind of where I am now. I've been working on it, especially here recently, several times a week, and It's sort of in production. Part of the video is done, but I'm still doing some writing on the other parts. So it's going to be a little while maybe before that's done, but I hope by the first of the year we'll have it ready to go.
Oh, nice.
We will of course talk about, you know, the usual things, exponential growth. That's where it begins. You know, there's the mathematician in me.
Right.
There's no point talking about ecological overshoot until we know what exponential growth is. And so we definitely cover that, and then I will definitely cover, you know, the fundamental issue, which is that we are not on the earth, we're part of it, and because we're part of it, we rely upon it deeply for our own survival. We need those ecosystem services, and that's precisely what we're destroying, right? So I mean, it's the classic cliche, we're sawing off the branch on which we sit. And we'll talk, you know, it'll talk briefly about the same sorts of things I've talked about before, you know, biodiversity loss, the insect apocalypse, loss of forest, loss of water, loss of arable land, and the blight of pollution, which of course includes climate change, because climate change is a consequence of pollution. Our waste, right? Not the only waste that is causing an impact, but one of the main ones. But then I want to talk a little bit more seriously about what it means for us to be in ecological overshoot and why we're in ecological overshoot. So that's brought me to some interesting points that I'm keen to share with you.
Please.
Right. So one of the things that makes it difficult to talk about this is you'll run into people, especially very progressive people, who will want to tell you that it's basically a technology problem, that we haven't really overpopulated the world. You know, there aren't too many people. It's just a matter of how well we distribute the resources, and you know, it's a distribution problem and a technology problem. So we can come up with new solutions about how to grow more food and so on. People in that camp love to diss all of the doomsayers that have come along over the years, starting really with Thomas Malthus, who was an English economist, I think.
Yeah, he's an economist, yeah, Malthusian theory.
And he noticed that, you know, populations grow exponentially. It's certainly true. And when he looked at agriculture, he looked at agricultural output doesn't seem to grow exponentially. It only grows arithmetically. And so what that means is that, you know, in the beginning, things are going along okay, but as time goes on, the population growth far outstrips the growth in food supply, with the obvious consequence that there's going to be both famines and competition. And competition among people usually results in violence and warfare. So he said, you know, inevitably there's going to be starvation and warfare in any society at some point because of this simple fact. And this was 200 years ago. And then it turned out that actually no, because starting from about 1850 or so, we've started getting more and more food out of the same acres of ground. And by the time I was born, around 1960, there were 3.5 billion people, 3 to 3.5. They were all getting fed. And then the population doubled again. Now it's 8 billion. But the food supply not only kept pace, it even accelerated and got, you know, it grew a little bit faster than the population did. Some people like to say, well, Malthus was just stupid. He obviously didn't know how things were going to work out. And you also have some other people like the Club of Rome with their Limits to Growth publication in 1970. Many people know about that. Their prediction was that food would start to be a real problem right about now, starting in the 2020s, along with other resource issues, and the population would see a dramatic decline. And yet here we are. So what's going on? Why does it seem as though all these predictions that we were going to run into problems with food and overpopulation just haven't panned out? So the bad news is that Malthus was right, and the Club of Rome people were right. And understanding why they were right and why their predictions failed, although, to be fair, the Club of Rome's predictions haven't failed yet, because this is exactly the time when they said things would start to get wonky. Why they failed is very important. And it wasn't until I read William Catton's book, Overshoot, that it really came into crystal clarity for me as to exactly what was going on. Throughout most of the history of our species, we've been opportunistic omnivores, which is to say, whatever environment we found ourselves in, we figured out what was edible and how to get it. So if you're an Eskimo, you eat seals. If you live in the Great Plains, you eat grain. If you live in the tropics, you eat cassava, right, and bushmeat, so on and so forth. So that all started to change, actually, from an ecological point of view. We're still eating the same food, but we're not exactly opportunistic omnivores anymore. We went from being omnivores to being detritivores. Let me unpack that word. Omnivores, of course, are a species that can eat a wide range of different foods. And lots of creatures are omnivores. A lot of very successful species are omnivores. So take the pig family, for example. Pigs are omnivores. Bears are omnivores. I raise chickens.
Well, he glitched. All right. I'll be back. He warned us about this. I'm really interested to hear what this third category of vor is.
Okay.
So
can you hear me okay?
I can. Okay. So you're about to explain this third category.
Right. So anyway, all these different kinds of creatures are omnivores. But detritivores are different. Detritivores are also opportunistic. But instead of eating whatever food happens to be around in an environment, they focus on detritus. They focus on waste products. So when the leaves in a deciduous biome like I live in here in the eastern United States, when they fall every year, there's a whole host of creatures that feed on those fallen leaves, right? Which is why the leaves aren't 10 feet thick by now, because they're about 8 inches thick at the end of autumn when they've all fallen, right? But by springtime, something has happened. They've sort of vanished, right? They've been eaten by the detritivores. They've been eaten by those creatures that feed on waste, and it's earthworms and certain insects and molds and fungi and so on and so forth. So when there's a sudden bunch of leaves, then the creatures that feed on them kind of explode a little bit, the fungi especially, and eat them all up, and then they go back down again. Another example, and this was brought home to me a couple of years ago. I found out in my garden, I found a dead snake. And I'm kind of interested in bugs. So I was studying carefully the bugs that were on it because I had never seen them before. There was a type of beetle. It was brown and it had this bright yellow spot on the back of it. And there were other flies and things. And when I looked them up, I discovered that those particular insects were precisely the insects that eat decaying flesh. It's the reason there's not decaying stuff all over, because something comes along and eats it and recycles those nutrients back into the ground, right? Detritivores.
Yes.
Another great example, you know that there are these big algae blooms these days, right? Like at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Every year there's a huge dead zone that appears at the mouth of the Mississippi River. It covers, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of square miles. And the reason is because there's a flux of phosphorus and nitrogen from all of our agriculture, goes down the Mississippi River, floods that delta and out into the Gulf of Mexico. And opportunistic algae thrive on that nitrogen and just explode in population, billions and probably trillions of these algae growing just all at once. And they use up all the oxygen and everything else dies. And until they've used up all the nutrients, and then they die off, and then things go back to the way they were again. Detritivores. So the claim here, and I owe this to William Catton in his book, Overshoot, the claim is that human beings became detritivores. What are we eating? Well, we're eating decayed vegetable matter from about 300 million years ago. We figured out how to turn fossil fuel into food. And we figured that out in the 19th century. There's something called the Haber-Bosch process. Maybe you've heard of it.
Yes.
When I was 14 and I was sent to stay with a family for 2 weeks, a friend of my mother's had married a farmer in Kansas. And this farmer farmed 3,000 acres. And it was all in corn. It was just these vast, as far as the eye could see, fields of corn, right? And I was taken out on a tractor, huge, big tractor, with these great big things on it. And what they were doing was they were pumping ammonia into the soil. I didn't realize this at the time, but the soil is actually dead. There's nothing living in it particularly. But they pump it full of ammonia, and that makes the corn grow like gangbusters, right? Where does that ammonia come from? It comes from what's called the Haber-Bosch process. They figured out how to turn natural gas that comes out of the same wells that the oil comes out of into ammonia. It happened in the late 19th century. So now, without that nitrogen, of course, we couldn't grow any of the food that we grow. Several analyses have shown that for every calorie of food that you eat, there are 9 calories of fossil fuel behind it, mostly in the form of nitrogen fertilizer that's been created from natural gas. So we're actually eating 9/10 of what's on our plate. What we're actually eating is detritus. It is the remains of plant life and animal life that lived hundreds of millions of years ago and decayed and sank into the earth, and we've dug it up again, and that's what we're eating, in fact.
Right.
So why was Malthus wrong? Malthus was wrong because he thought we were going to go on being omnivores and eating the food that the earth provides year to year. And we didn't. We became detritivores. We hit upon a way to eat decayed matter in the form of natural gas and oil. Mm-hmm. So this puts us in a very interesting situation in a couple of different ways. To begin with, it allowed our population to explode. Remember those algae blooms off the Mississippi Delta and elsewhere in the world? We're like those algae blooms. We hit upon a rich source of energy that we could turn into food, and we've exploded in our population, far, far bigger, many, many times bigger than ever before in human history. But like the algae bloom, that only continues for as long as the detritus is there. And of course, there's nothing to renew it. So once we use it up, we don't have an alternative. There's no alternative to oil to put nitrogen into the soil. And so when we can no longer do that, what we'll have is a whole lot of dead soil and no way to grow food on it. That puts things in a much starker sort of light than just the idea that we're overpopulated and need to shrink our population, because things are actually kind of more desperate than that. Another way of looking at it is we have this concept of ghost acreage. So I live in the country, as I said, and I have a pretty large garden, and I keep chickens. So I grow, a non-trivial amount of the calories we eat, one way or another. But I do so because I'm able to do so because the energy that I have to put into it is fairly minimal. I don't have to chop wood to heat my house because I have electricity to do it. I don't have to do all my digging by hand because I have equipment that's powered by gasoline to do it. I don't have to grow all the food for my chickens because I can go to the feed store and buy feed for them. All of those inputs are possible because of that fossil fuel. If I didn't have that, I might be able to scrape a living out of the land I live on. I've got 5 acres, most of it's wooded. I've got about an acre of pasture and a very large garden, a few fruit trees. I might be able to feed the 2 of us, my wife and I, but it would take 10 times more work, and I'm not young anymore. If I had a family here, maybe some strapping young men, but then they'd have to be fed too, so it would take a lot more land. And again, everyone would be working pretty much all the time,
right,
in order to keep us fed. And if we had to do it sustainably, that means not only the sowing and the reaping and the tending of the land, but it also means animals, because you have to have a nutrient cycle in order to do things sustainably. And animals are the ones that provide the nitrogen and other things that are needed to keep that soil going. So you have to rotate crops and fodder, and it's a complicated business. You go back 400 or 500 years, and people were sustainably farming, but it was a very complicated thing that had you needed to know a lot, right? You didn't just watch a couple of YouTube videos and suddenly you're a subsistence farmer. It doesn't work like that. So we have this concept of ghost acreage, as I said. The land I live on is providing our sustenance. There's a whole lot of other land that is helping out. There's the land on which they grow the grain that the chicken feed is made from. There's the land that once grew all of the tropical plants that eventually turned into the oil and natural gas that I use, right? That land too. And if you look at all the ghost acreage, just for me and my wife alone, we're talking at least dozens, maybe hundreds of acres of productive land in order to provide the life that I'm used to.
Right.
And most of that ghost acreage is rapidly going away.
Right.
It's being used up. Not only the old stuff, from that produced all the oil and everything, because the oil's getting used up, but also the land we've got, because we're killing it with industrial agriculture, so that once the artificial fertilizers are gone, it can't grow food anymore either.
Right.
And so the actual situation it's actually pretty dire.
Yeah, no, it's when I was going through my my horticulture curriculum, my certification curriculum, we dealt a lot with. I mean, there was one class specifically about soil, like 16 weeks on just dirt, and it was fascinating how much is involved in soil, like actual living soil, and how nature could grow things, with all with the microbial ecosystems and whatnot. And how we're just utterly destroying it, like you pointed out.
It's a sobering thought to realize that all that agricultural land, all those vast acreages of corn or rice or wheat or whatever it is, from an ecological point of view, that's just a desert. It's not alive. There's no ecosystem. It's just a desert.
Yeah, exactly. But like you said, like they're taking living soil, which is actually it is what it is. I mean, microbes are living little creatures who do lots of good stuff. And they're just literally murdering it. Literally, that's what it is. It's the murder of soil. That should be the title.
I have vivid memories of all that ammonia. I mean, it makes your eyes water and your nose
sting.
So,
like, why would you put ammonia in this stuff? That's crazy. That's something that you have to be super. You have to wear a hazmat suit to use in your bathtub. Like, I mean, I'm obviously being exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, it's just that's insanity. But but it has a certain function and it creates greater productivity. And that's what people want nowadays because of a growing population, and there's supply demand, and there's all sorts of economic reasons why too, and profit and blah 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 blah. I mean, there's a whole slew of reasons why it is happening. And one, it's kind of like a network, right? Each one kind of feeds into the other, like a recursive system, if you will. Feedback loop sort of system. But it's very disconcerting how this is happening. I've seen videos of you think of you think of like an evil organization in the real world. I think of Monsanto. And these guys are at the the bottom of a lot of this stuff. They are just nasty dudes, man. And so I just wanted to put in my 2 cents.
You have to keep in mind all those people who came up with the things that made the Green Revolution possible. They were heroes.
100%.
Haber-Bosch, that's named after a person, right? The Haber-Bosch process. 2 people, maybe. I mean, those people made it possible to feed a world where otherwise people would have starved. And so, of course, they couldn't not do that, right? And that's one of the things that I think is so important for us psychologically. It's really easy to fall into, well, there's just these evil people who did this thing, and if only they weren't evil, or if only we got rid of them, then somehow it would have been okay, or it can still be okay.
Everything would be fine.
People, right? There was no mastermind. This isn't a Bond movie.
They weren't
There's not some evil mastermind somewhere who did this to us. This is simply, it's a Greek tragedy, right? We are a tragic figure because we figured out some stuff that was really helpful without the capacity as a society, as a group, and I do mean the capacity, we actually lacked the capacity to foresee what was going to happen as a consequence, right? So it was a tragic flaw, and like a typical Greek tragic hero, of course, it's going to get us. And I think it's also equally important to understand that it is politically impossible for any society to choose to shrink itself, right? Because it quickly turns into a game of musical chairs. Somebody's going to lose. When you say, "Oh, we've got to shrink. We have to reduce. We've got to shrink our economy. We've got to reduce our population." As soon as you start saying that, it's true. It's not wrong, but it's impossible to enact any program to make that happen as a political matter. Certainly not in a democracy, but even just more generally, because people cannot choose to endure to bring about the consequences that would have to come about, right? And I think we're seeing, and it's, this is going to be a later video, but this, of course, is feeding into our dramatic social and political, and especially geopolitical decline. I mean, one of the things we're seeing now in the last 2 years is that the geopolitical situation has turned into a catastrophe right underneath our noses, right? From Ukraine to Gaza to 180 other conflicts around the world that are currently ongoing. More than I read today, more than in the last 30 years. And it's because we're now in a game of musical chairs permanently, where every time the music stops, somebody doesn't get a chair to sit down on. And what that means is mass death, and conflict, and people in desperate straits. And there's nothing anyone can do about it. Puts us in a very difficult situation.
It is dire, and it's dismal and awful, and seemingly apocalyptic. Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we've as a species, we've been through it before on a regional basis, right? I mean, there've been 90 or so civilizations. Many of them collapsed. Some of them just were taken over by other civilizations, but a great many collapsed, and some of those collapses were catastrophic, right? A lot of people died. Society disintegrated to a certain extent. A great deal was lost. But it wasn't the end of even those particular people. I mean, there are still Greeks, from the end of the Greco civilization, 1100 BC.
Egyptians,
there are still Mayans. I mean, the people are still there. It's the civilization that went away, and it entailed a great deal of loss, a great deal of suffering. But apocalypse, end of the world, if that happens, it's because some Nimrod decides to throw a nuclear bomb and it all goes to hell. But otherwise, it's just going to be a very tough time. And people have been through tough times before. Our species lived through a few ice ages. So, I don't think it's helpful to think in terms of, well, this is the end. Everybody let's all lie down and die together, right? I think it's possible to be realistic about the situation we're in and still not despair. In fact, I think as human beings, that's really kind of what we're called to do, to understand in stark terms what the situation is and to not despair about it.
Sure. That's very sound advice. But it strikes me as well, and I'm not a pessimistic person by any stretch. I'd rather actually not care than become a pessimist. Maybe that's the same thing. I don't know. But to think we're all doomed is one thing. To oh well, if we are, we are. If we're not, we're not. Is another thing. But I think about the people that who run, like you said, they're not inherently bad, evil people. They think they're doing good, but that are developing this technology and these methods of industrial agriculture and that kind of thing. And again, I mean, even to this day, they're hey, look, we're feeding millions of people. How could that possibly be bad? The nutrient value of the food we're supplying is a little bit less, but you can just take a multivitamin and you're fine. You can offset the problems with what we're doing with other things, so on and so forth. So I don't, being that that's the case, I don't see them going, well, maybe organic gardening is better, or maybe or maybe permaculture methods are better. The way the nature grows things itself. I don't see them getting there to the point where they're maybe we really should stop doing this because it isn't good. Do you?
Well, it is possible to farm sustainably. There are people doing it.
I agree, 100%.
In fact, they're getting quite a lot of food out of the land too, but it's not happening because it can't be done on an industrial scale. It has to be done on a local scale. Right. Small is beautiful.
Yes.
to
Well, it's a great book, by the way. He's referring to a book.
invoke the memory of E.F. Schumacher. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Wonderful book on economics. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not necessary for everyone to starve, but there's absolutely no possibility of sustaining 8 billion people on this planet for very much longer. That's not going to happen. And a whole lot of folks who thought they weren't going to have to get their hands dirty are going to be out pulling weeds and digging in the dirt to live. And it's going to take a couple of generations, I think, probably more, until society manages to adjust to a sustainable agricultural model. And in the meantime, it's going to be some pretty rough going because there'll be so much conflict and so much hardship. I often look around. I live here in Central Virginia, and it's beautiful land. It's not terribly rich soil. It's kind of an interesting story. When the Europeans moved here and kicked out the Indians and discovered that they could grow tobacco and sell it for a ton of money, Virginia was a really rich state in the late 18th century because it could grow all this tobacco and sell it to the Europeans. Who all got addicted to nicotine. And in the area I live around Appomattox, it's just woods everywhere. But in the early 18th century, and I go back to the time of the Civil War even, it was all clear cut because it was all planted in tobacco. But they used up all the nutrients in the soil in about 50 years, and then nothing else would grow, and so the trees all came back. Yeah, so it's this beautiful area, all this land. Right now, it mostly grows cattle. Not entirely. There's a lot of corn. There's a lot of soy. And there's still some tobacco around, actually. You have to look for it, but it's there. But all the corn and soy and tobacco is being grown with nitrogen from the Haber-Bosch process, so it's all being grown with fossil fuel. The cows, on the other hand, they're just eating the grass that grows. You don't have to fertilize the pasture. The cows do it for you.
Right.
And I know there are a lot of folks who say, no, we got to go plant-based. We can't do the cows. Well, honestly, around here, if you're not doing cows, it's because you're taking some input from somewhere else into the soil so that things will grow. That's what's happening. And people could do sustainable farming here if they kept livestock and rotated their crops, crops to fodder, to fallow, like they did in the old days. You could grow food here very sustainably in that kind of a system. But nobody knows how to do that for the most part, and it requires a lot more people on the land, working the land, in order to make that happen. Even with machinery, it requires more. So we're looking at a transformation at least as profound as the one that took all the people off the land over the course of the 20th century. Right? It's got to put them back on the land. It used to be 30-40% of the population was busy making food for everybody else, and now it's down to 2%. Well, that's going to have to reverse itself, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I guess I just don't see people doing that.
Well, they're not going until they have to.
I don't see enough of the right people doing it. How's that?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, there are people who are doing it so that they know how, and they can help teach other people. In fact, YouTube videos, if you're interested, look up sustainable agriculture. You'll find all kinds of stuff. There's this farmer up in South Dakota, I think. I forget his name now, but he's made some great videos. He took over his family farm. This was back, I think, maybe in the 80s. And discovered the soil was all dead. It wouldn't hold any water. You pour water on it, it just runs off. And he turned that around with some sustainable regenerative agriculture methods and showed how he managed to make the land productive again, made it so that it would.
Where was this?
Water. It's in South Dakota.
Okay.
So there are people know how to do it.
It's happening. I know. I mean, I'm literally trained in those methods. I know it can happen. And I'm constantly proselytizing the idea of like local organic farms. I went to the village board, the village, the mayor's staff, the village board in the town I grew up in, Mundelein, Illinois, right over here. And because I became pretty decent friends with some of them, and just like gave them this whole spiel about like local organic farms and how they should like as a village try to like start focusing on these sorts of things. And I talked to people in the restaurants around here. They would love like farm to table restaurants because fresh is always better. And people want organic. They do. It's just right now it's more expensive than non-organic, and that's a problem. But it's happening more and more and more. There was a guy somewhere in the Middle East, and that's about the extent of I can remember. took like a dead valley and applied like all sorts of like organic farming methods and like permaculture methods and brought the whole valley back to life.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable. Like, so no, it's definitely happening. I just, again, I don't know if the people in the corporate, or like, the one percenters, whatever, that own like industrial agricultural businesses are going to give on that. I mean, that's
Well,
what frightens me the most, I guess. Go ahead.
some of them are setting themselves up to be feudal lords again, and you look at Bill Gates and several of the others, right there. They're buying up these vast swaths of agricultural, because they recognize kind of what's coming. But I don't think that's sustainable either. I mean, these are not very smart people.
No.
And that's a very important thing about these leaders and innovators and job creators at the top of the economic level, the Gateses and the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks and so on and so forth. Honestly, they're not very bright, right? They got where they were through privilege and luck. And, as the old saying goes, born on third and thought you hit a triple. And once you listen to these guys' ideas, and really start analyzing what it is they're doing, you realize that, no, they're just busy being billionaires. They're doing what billionaires do, and they don't really know much.
No, they don't. Yeah, you can just like hear Elon Musk talk, and you can, like, all right, yeah, you're not. I've never heard him display any sort of like, intellectual acumen. But okay, maybe he's just
maybe he's modest other people's ideas.
Right, exactly. I mean, Bill Gates literally didn't invent anything.
No,
nothing. He took it all from other people. He invented how to market. Or Steve Jobs. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Anyway, they're billions. Are you kidding me? Yeah, no, Bill Gates like loves GMOs and stuff like that, and that's the direction he wants to go. And GMOs are not a great idea either because of what they do to the soil, and he's sort of like just anti natural processes that they have, like the pest resistance and pathogen resistance and stuff like that. And there are ways of getting those things. I mean, there are pesticides and herbicides and so on, fertilizers that are all natural, and neem oil is a very, very effective in a lot of ways. And it's hard. You can douse your tomato plant with neem oil, and the next day eat the tomato and be fine. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are happening. There's no doubt there's knowledge out there about these things. There's no doubt. Again, what scares me is just that the people with the economic and political power aren't going to give on it. But we'll see. I hope I'm wrong.
I think one of the most important things we can do, and this is something else I've been trying to figure out how to communicate effectively in this video, is we have to think about ourselves as being part of nature.
Absolutely.
We tend to think of ourselves as being somehow different from it, and this is true both on the what I would want to say the technocratic, privileged end of the spectrum, as well as on the progressive back to nature groups. Because you hear from a lot of those folks, like you hear this a lot in the Green Party, that or from Green Party members, that humanity's like a virus or like a cancer, right? Like the Earth is this healthy body, and humanity comes along and we're like this cancer and we're destroying it. Both of those express a kind of egotism that I think is an obstacle to understanding how we fit into the world. We're every bit as much a product of nature as a tree or an animal is, right? Nature made us what we are and who we are. And so when you think about yourself as being part of nature and integrated into nature, then I think you're in a position to come to terms with the fact that as sapient species, we have a capacity to make certain choices, and it really matters what choices we make. And that can lead you to ecological wisdom. But thinking that somehow you're just going to have power and control over nature, or thinking on the other hand that you're just, a horrible disease in nature that needs to be got rid of, those are two ends that kind of meet on the wrong side of the issue. They think of us as being something apart, and we're not a part. We are a part, right? And once you do that, then you start thinking about things like, okay, well, so there's a nutrient cycle. How do we fit into the nutrient cycle? Right now, we're taking all of our shit, and it doesn't go anywhere useful, does it? And so I mean, that's 8 billion of us, with I'm sick to the United States, 1/3 of a billion of us, who are throwing away all the nutrients we consume because they only stay in us for a short time. And when I got into the Green Party here locally, One of the big things people were up in arms about was spreading what's called waste sludge on fields. It's the processed sewage. And they thought this was just terrible that they were doing this, and they really wanted to fight it. And they never asked, well, how then are those nutrients going to get recycled? Because if nutrients aren't recycled, that breaks the environmental processes, that breaks the ecology. So once you start thinking of yourself as being necessarily being integrated into natural processes, then you can start asking intelligent questions, like, what are the inputs and what are the outputs, and how does it recycle? How does it keep itself going? How does it become sustainable? And there are answers to those questions, but you have to begin from the right place, not from the place of, well, we'll find some technology to control it all, like Bill Gates, right? And not from the place of, well, we're just bad, we should all lie down and die together. That's not helpful either.
No, yeah, that's true. So, okay, a lot of this is reminding me of at least the content of the book, the Gaia hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the author's name. I never read it, but I do remember a couple things about it. In that, according to this author's, I'm pretty sure it was male, so I'll just say he. His theory, and he has a global theory, a global system worked out supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
That if you do everything right, the Earth can be sustainable with a population of 25 billion people, but then that's it. Now you're saying that 8 billion is too much, and I tend to agree with. Again, I never read his book, so I don't know. He could be a complete whack job and totally wrong about everything. That number strikes me as way too high. But when I think about overpopulation as being central to, or a part of the center of the problems going on with this stuff, fossil fuels is not like, excuse me, petroleum is not like inherently bad. It's a matter of scale and use, right? Of the extraction of the resource, the processing of the resource, and the use of the resource. So taking crude oil, turning it into petroleum, and how we use it on the scale that we do including scale. Scale has to be included in it. If 1,000 people lived on the Earth and figured out how to use oil to turn into petroleum to move it wouldn't be nothing bad would happen. It would be fine.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, okay. So, but when 8 billion people are doing it, that's bad. Okay. Right. Do you have an idea, even a vague notion of like how many people could live on the Earth sustainably? And you said
No.
like 8 billion is way too much. Like that's got to be reduced.
Well, I mean, commonsensically, it depends on our patterns of consumption, right?
Okay.
Sure. If we all live like monks, and wear sandals instead of shoes, and eat only what we can grow with our own hands, if we all live like that, then a lot more of us can live on the planet than if we live the current industrial civilization lifestyle.
And the population would decrease because you'd be celibate.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Probably not. But that brings up a point. There's something called human nature, right?
Right.
I mean, we are the kind of creature we are. I said before that our story is a tragedy, right? Because it's our own nature, it's our own fatal flaw that has led us to this impasse. And this is the reason I started my series off talking about energy and complexity. Because as dynamical, complex systems, human societies, just like anything else in nature, tend to develop along pathways that maximize the use of energy. Nature, and this is as true of us as of anything else, nature always tries to minimize energy gradients as fast as it can, which means if there's an energy gradient available, it will find some way to use it as quickly as possible. So when we invented heat engines, which made it possible to start exploiting fossil fuels in a big way, along about the early 19th century, we naturally developed in directions that maximized the ways in which we used up that energy. And I don't think there's any way to stop that. Maybe on a small scale, people could, develop the customs and the systems and the mythologies that would allow them to say, okay, we have this amazing energy source, but we're just going to use a little bit of it, day to day. But that's probably not a stable equilibrium, because that's not how nature works. Nature exploits energy as fast as it can. So, and human civilization is an emergent property. Nobody controls it. Nobody's ever gonna control it, because that's not the kind of thing it is. That's not the kind of thing we are, right? You can't get a bunch of wise ants together and convince everybody else in the anthill how they're going to run the anthill. That's not how it works. So instead, what's going to happen is we're going to run up against our thermodynamic and ecological limits. In fact, we started running up against them 50 years ago. And we're starting to run up against them harder and harder and harder every year, with more and more dire consequences. And the result is going to be that the system we've built is going to crash. And there's going to be a long, long period of reorganization. And then something new will start. Unless we destroy ourselves through warfare, which is a real possibility,
sure.
Eventually, and it might be centuries, something new will come along. But this one is going away. And there's really nothing you can actually do about that on the level of society or civilization. There's a great deal you can do individually, and I advocate that absolutely. But I think when you talk about, what can we as a society do? Well, nothing, because that's not what societies are. Societies don't make up their mind to do this or that, right? They just develop in the ways that societies develop, because they're a natural phenomenon. And one of the things driving them is the maximum entry reproduction principle, which simply says, given two possible pathways, the one that uses the most energy is going to tend to get chosen. That's how things work.
Right. That's very interesting. The maximum.
So, it's a great idea, if we could somehow control things so that, we found this beautiful fossil fuel thing of, this giant charged up battery that the Earth charged up over 300 million years. And there it is waiting for us to use it with its billions and billions and billions of thermal units worth of energy. Gosh, let's think of some really clever way to make this last essentially forever and make everyone's life better. That would be wonderful. But that's not what societies do. That's not how they work, right? Societies aren't like these wise old sages who figure stuff out. Societies are millions of people who build a civilization not from any plan, but just from the trillions of daily interactions between them and their environment, right? And each one of those interactions is always chosen according to a rational self-interest, to the extent that we can be rational, right? So there's not a lot you can do to change it. That may sound unhopeful. I don't mean it to be. I just think it's important to be realistic about what's possible. There's a reason. Here we are at the COP28. Down there they are down there in Qatar, and what are they doing? They're looking around at each other and saying, we've met every few years now since the 90s, and we've always agreed to reduce our emissions and get climate change under control. And nothing has changed in the trajectory of our civilization's use of fossil fuel as a consequence. And nobody should be surprised by that, because politically, socially, you can't make those kinds of decisions. It's not possible.
I think that's one of the. You're talking a lot like in system science jargon and lingo here. It just reminds me a lot of like the importance of decentralization. And I think that because as a centralized unit, like as a society is just simply too complex for any centralized system to really commandeer it all the variables and the configurations, say. And like you were saying, individual people can do things, and we could probably only got about 10 minutes left. We can finish it up with some what you can do kind of stuff. For my own, I'll say this, and I've said it before, so I apologize for repeating myself, but I can literally fit every physical thing I own in my truck except for my bed. I do live a very monkish lifestyle, except for the celibacy. But I'm single. I don't own any property. I don't even date. I live with my mother, because my dad died, not because I'm a loser, but to help her out. And, I spend my time reading and contemplating and, like a monk would, if you will. I don't wear sandals and robes and such. And, but I think there's something to be said about giving by not taking. Henry David Thoreau kicked me off on this a long time ago. just living a simple life. Like a simple
Living
life is so
simple.
like, why would you want to live in such stressful, like overly complicated, say,
And that's, I
life?
mean, that's very old wisdom, right? I mean, you go back
Yeah,
to any
it's vicious.
really good tradition, you know, from thousands of years ago, and they're saying live a simple life,
Right. It's
because that's
better.
what works, right?
It
Yeah,
does work.
but
It's
that's
better. It's
something you
better
can
for
do
you.
individually. Try to
Yeah.
get 1,000 people to do it, and you'll discover that they don't behave themselves. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And there'd be one in that crowd that would like take
But
advantage
you
of the
know,
people.
even small scale, simple societies are too complex for a person to understand. And the reason they worked is because the everything that they needed to know was encoded for them in customs and traditions, right? That's what customs and traditions were. They were
Sure.
the way you encoded the group knowledge about how to make things work, right? That's why you planted when the moon did this, and you harvested, you know, when the sun did that, because that's what your grandparents and your parents did, and they taught you. And it's not because you got an agriculture degree, right? And that's true not just of agriculture, but of how to organize society, how to form family relationships, how to get married, how to have children. I mean, all of those things were encoded in customs and traditions. And that's important to know because it means that as we go through this transition away from industrial fossil fuel based society, we're going to need to rethink how people live. And you can do that rethinking on an individual basis, but on a community basis, it can only be done through a natural social dynamic that will take a very, very long time and which will eventually end up encoding a sustainable way to live in its customs and traditions because that's how it works, right? So yeah, on an individual basis, you know, live simply. Um, and as John Michael Greer said, you know, collapse now, avoid the rush. Um, Learn how to do it. Um, these are all very important. And by the way, that is one of the things that will make you into a leader if you do those things, right? Because you will be leading the way into a human future. Whereas the people who call themselves leaders now are simply leading the way to destruction,
Oh,
right? So you can become
so
you you can become a leader into a human future. Um, so on an individual basis, you can do that, but you have to recognize that on a society wide, on a civilization wide basis, um, we're all going to make it up as we go along, and eventually it will settle itself into some new pattern that will, among other things, be parameterized by the available energy, right? Which will be a lot less than we have now.
yeah, no, it's true. And yeah, again, that's some sound advice. You know, and I'm going to throw a little something that make me sound a little spiritual, maybe even a little hippy dippy. But honestly, I really think that part of the psychological, emotional aspects of that is being grateful. I love
Mm,
I love gratitude. Gratitude is like, I mean,
yeah.
seriously, like, you know, even about things that we're finding to be like more problematic than beneficial. But like every day, like, I mean, seriously, like when I can go to the store and buy food instead of like having to bust my butt
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
grow it, I'm like, this is nice. You know, I'm so grateful that I have this opportunity. That kind
Well,
of
and so
thing.
many things to be grateful for just right in this generation, because in so many ways, I mean, you know, when I was growing up, you didn't have the entirety of human knowledge and history at your fingertips. You had to go to a library
Oh
and
man,
find maybe a little sliver of it and extrapolate from there. We've got it all at our fingertips. And look at you and I. We're talking in real time with pictures, you know, and you're in Illinois and I'm here in Virginia. I mean, this is amazing,
it's
right?
really cool. It's
Um,
very
but,
cool.
but you're right. I think it's a strange fact of human psychology. We really can't be happy unless we're grateful. I don't know why
I
it is. That's how it works.
but it is, you know, and that's okay. There's lots of things we don't know that are still the case.
Hmm.
So that should be a bumper sticker. But yeah, no, I tell you, like I love, like, 'cause I mean, I was that kid who read a lot, and I went to the library all the time and that kind of thing. And now I can look up anything I want in the palm of
Oh
my hand.
yeah. Well, and
Like
not
that
only
is
that.
like it's like, you know, the Oracle of Delphi in my
Uh-huh.
palm of my hand. I can just ask it any question and I can get an answer.
Well, you know, you've probably seen these meme pictures about this, but you know, I look at this thing, and you know, it's not just a telephone, right? It's a video camera, it's a recorder, it's a flashlight,
Mhm. It's
computer,
a movie
it's a
screen, a TV
compass, it's a
screen. It's
movie screen, right? And I can name a half dozen other things that I do with my phone all the time, right? An alarm clock, right? And then all those things, calendar, a personal index. I mean, it's all in here, and it only cost me, a few $100. I'm astounded. And that gets you to wondering, are we going to get to keep any of this? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how much of our knowledge we'll get to keep, and nobody knows. People who think they know don't know, because again, it's going to happen naturally. We're part of nature, and societies and civilizations organize themselves in ways that no human being can control. So
absolutely. And real quick, Loud Thinker, who's Gokhan, who's a Green Party member here in Illinois, who does this show sometimes, said you'd find the same joy at my brother's cabin in North Minnesota, David. You're absolutely right. I was. I love that too. That's a part of my disposition, or disposition towards simplicity. I did Renaissance fairs for years, and we spent all our time in forests and in the woods and outside. And with this was before cell phones. We might have had a TV that we very rarely used. And it was just me and my friends in nature, and it was fabulous. And I would take that. I would take that probably any day. I'm saying for where I'm at now, this is pretty badass. That's all I'm saying. And because again, I'm a big fan. I'm a philosopher. I like knowledge, and I like, so what did Plato say about this? And I can find out like that instead of having to spend 3 weeks going back and forth in the library. And the knowledge, the access to knowledge too is a huge part of that for me. Just huge.
Well, and I've started using the large language models, to help me with my videos, because it's helpful to have, the Chat GPT technology available to you. As we can talk about another day, how disruptive that's going to be. It's kind of terrifying, but it's also quite useful.
I just started using
it's going to be at least as disruptive. It'll be at least as disruptive socially and economically as the internet was, probably 10 times more.
It certainly has. It seems it has the potential to do to be used in some pretty nasty ways. I just started to use it. I just downloaded the app 3-4 weeks ago. It's pretty cool. I mean, I'm like, write me a 4-page paper on blah, 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 and it's just. I was like, wow.
My son, who's quite knowledgeable about these things. My son is pretty knowledgeable, and he's also a pretty deep thinker. And his prediction is that it will destroy the internet. It will make the internet absolutely useless. I'm sorry. It will make it completely useless, because there's no way to tell whether the information you're getting is actually information. Right?
That's one of the aspects that's terrifying, is you don't know what's they're already constructed.
And so, of what use is the internet to you then? And it will destroy the advertising industry, right? In consequence. And right now, the advertising industry is what makes the internet possible, and that's going to be destroyed. Because how do you know what you're looking at? Are you looking at a real ad? Is it for a real thing? Is that the real price? Right?
That's interesting.
Is that really the politician? Is that really what they said? Is this really what happened overseas, or am I looking at something that somebody wants me to believe? And when you're in that situation, of course, when every channel of information is that badly polluted, you don't get any information anymore. It's a dead line. So that's his prediction. I don't know if it's true, but we'll see.
We'll find out. That's really interesting and terrifying. Yeah, because I mean that was one of the things about the Screen Actors Guild strike was the use of AI, and there was I just saw something. It was briefly I saw it. Nicolas Cage talking about how AI terrifies him, and he said something like, "There's a movie being made in Japan with somebody's likeness being done by AI, it is being done by." And he's like, and the actual actor who it's based upon has no legal rights to that at all. You can't say, don't do that. So therefore, any production studio can just say, well, okay, Nicolas Cage doesn't want to, we don't have to pay Nicolas Cage $1 billion to be an actor. We'll just make it up.
Right. Well, and you can take Nicolas Cage's voice and Nick Nolte's face and, somebody else's body and put them all together and tweak it a bit. And now it's none of them, but by God, it's a movie star.
Interesting. Yeah. It's going to be, it's going to be wild to see what happens with AI. It really is. Because like I said, I've been using ChatGPT and it's cool. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty cool. Very powerful. Yeah. But it does have some limitations. I'll say that. I asked it a couple of questions. I asked it a question yesterday about, so I'm not going to say what it is because it's kind of weird. But it said it wouldn't answer because it thought it was a rude question. I'm like, what?
Well, that's the programmers protecting. That's the company protecting itself. It used to be in the early days of OpenAI, the chat AI, the OpenAI folks, you could ask it to give you sources for its information, and it would give you links
Right.
and stuff. It won't do that anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which is too bad. Yeah, I mean, that's most of the usefulness for me right there.
I wonder if that's because of the school thing, because students using it. I wonder if that's some sort of reaction to that.
Maybe. I think Google's going to try to figure out how to integrate it into its search engine. I think they're doing that now. So maybe
Bing
that.
has it. Doesn't Bing have it already?
Maybe. I don't know.
I think. Okay.
I don't know.
Well, all right, well,
I've
dude,
reached the
man,
point in life where I can't begin to keep up with all the stuff that's going on.
it's crazy. No, it's nuts. All right. Well, Professor Sid Smith, thank you so much for coming on the show. Always
It
a
was
pleasure.
fun. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah,
And
after your next video comes out, I'm gonna watch it, and you can come back on. We can just kind of go over the whole thing.
Yeah,
I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. You said so. You're shooting for the first of the year, right about there.
yeah, I think that's realistic. I've made a lot of promises though before and haven't been able to keep them. A lot of that's for personal reasons. Life happens. But I think if things go well, yes, we're talking about around the first of the year.
Sounds great. I can't wait. Well, thank you again, sir. And if you can hang on after the show ends, I want to ask you something.
Yeah, you bet.
So you're
Thank you so much.
tuning into the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rych, with our special guest, Professor Sid Smith. Till next time, keep it green. No, be green. I haven't done this show in a while. Be green. Okay.